Alexander Reed, a 52-year-old white billionaire tech mogul, is interrupted during a crucial business meeting by security. A small black girl named Jasmine waits in his lobby, claiming he's her father and saying her mother Vanessa is dying in county hospital. As Alexander stares into familiar brown eyes that mirror his own determination, his perfectly controlled world shatters. The child holds a sealed envelope with his name, containing secrets that will force him to confront his greatest mistake and change 3 lives forever. Alexander gazed at the child, claiming to be his daughter, unable to fully process her words. The conference room behind him buzzed with impatient executives, but something in those familiar brown eyes held him captive. He dismissed his meeting with a curt apology and led the girl, Jasmine, to his private elevator. During the silent ride down 60 floors, she clutched a worn purple backpack, occasionally glancing up at him with an unsettling mixture of hope and suspicion. His driver awaited them, face carefully neutral as Alexander instructed him to county hospital. The luxury sedan felt suddenly foreign with this small presence beside him, her sneakers barely touching the floor. At the hospital, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they navigated grimy hallways that Alexander, with his private physicians and concierge healthcare, had never experienced. The stark contrast between his sterilized world and these crowded corridors hit him with unexpected force. A harried nurse barely glanced up when they approached, dismissively pointing down the hall when Alexander mentioned Vanessa Williams. They found her in a shared room with 3 other patients, separated only by thin curtains that offered the illusion of privacy. Alexander barely recognized the woman lying in the bed. 7 years ago, Vanessa had been vibrant and brilliant, her sharp mind and quicker wit having caught his attention during a project review. Now her skin had a grayish undertone, her once athletic frame diminished, monitors beeping with concerning irregularity. Jasmine rushed to her side, whispering something that made Vanessa's eyes flutter open. When she spotted Alexander, a complex emotion crossed her face before she simply said, "You actually came." Alexander remained near the doorway, suddenly aware of his tailored suit and the wealth it signified in this place of suffering. Vanessa struggled to sit up, then explained in a voice weakened by illness that she had been diagnosed with lupus 3 years ago. 4 doctors dismissed my symptoms before one finally ran the proper tests, she said, with practiced neutrality, though the injustice simmered beneath her words. By then, it had progressed significantly. Alexander learned that lupus disproportionately affected black women, a fact he had never known despite his company's substantial investments in healthcare technology. Vanessa's treatment had been repeatedly delayed by insurance complications, each denial pushing her condition toward critical. A young doctor entered, barely acknowledging Vanessa before addressing Alexander directly. "Are you family?" he asked, already deferring to the wealthy white man in the room. "He's my father," Jasmine answered before Alexander could respond, her certainty making him flinch. The doctor's demeanor instantly changed, becoming solicitous as he explained Vanessa's condition in technical terms directed entirely at Alexander. When Vanessa attempted to ask a question, the doctor continued speaking over her. Alexander noticed how Jasmine squeezed her mother's hand, a practiced gesture of solidarity. After the doctor left, Vanessa asked Jasmine to get some water, creating a moment of privacy. Once alone, she fixed Alexander with a direct gaze. "I worked in your company for 3 years. I was leading the neural network project when we had our affair." Her voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of emotion. "When I told you I was pregnant, you said it would complicate things. 2 weeks later, HR called me in. Downsizing, they said, though my department was exceeding all targets." Alexander felt cold realization washing over him. He had delegated the problem to his HR department with a vague directive to handle the situation, but had never directly ordered her termination. That plausible deniability now seemed a coward's defense. "I kept everything," Vanessa continued, reaching for a folder in the bedside drawer. "Emails, performance reviews, records of similar cases. After I was let go, I couldn't get hired anywhere despite my qualifications." Somehow, word had spread. She handed him the folder with trembling hands. "Jasmine was born with a congenital heart condition. The medical bills destroyed my savings. We had to move to West Point Heights." Alexander recognized the neighborhood name from news reports about gun violence and inadequate municipal services. "You put us there, Alexander, as surely as if you'd driven us yourself." A hospital administrator appeared then, clipboard in hand and disapproval on his face. He explained that Vanessa was being transferred to a county-run facility the following day, as her insurance coverage at this hospital had been exhausted. When Alexander asked about her current treatment plan, the administrator revealed it would be interrupted by the transfer, potentially setting her recovery back significantly. In that moment, something shifted in Alexander. He pulled out his phone, made a single call to his foundation, and established financial coverage for Vanessa's complete treatment. The administrator's attitude transformed instantly, offering assurances about the highest quality care. Alexander watched this metamorphosis with new eyes, suddenly seeing the system of privilege that had always bent to accommodate him while creating insurmountable barriers for others. As he arranged for Vanessa's continued care, he felt Jasmine's evaluating gaze upon him. Her existence was proof of his gravest moral failure, yet in her eyes he saw an intelligence that reminded him painfully of her mother. Looking between them, Alexander realized that his comfortable ignorance had ended the moment this child had entered his lobby. The question now was whether he possessed the courage to face what came next. The private elevator to Alexander's penthouse arrived with a discreet chime. Jasmine stood close to him, clutching her backpack and staring at the marble floors that reflected the chandelier's crystalline light. His residence occupied the top 3 floors of the building he owned, a fact that normally filled him with satisfaction but now seemed an obscene display of excess. Caroline, his executive assistant of 15 years, met them at the entrance, her practiced smile faltering when she saw Jasmine. "Mr. Reed, I wasn't aware you were bringing a guest home," she said, her gaze sliding over the child without truly seeing her. Alexander introduced Jasmine briefly, explaining she would be staying with him while her mother received medical treatment. Caroline's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something that made Alexander suddenly uncomfortable. "Will we need to verify anything about this arrangement?" she asked in a pointed tone that made her meaning unmistakable. Alexander found himself responding with uncharacteristic sharpness. "The only thing that needs verification is whether the blue guest room is prepared." As Caroline led Jasmine to the guest suite, Alexander noticed how his household staff, all white, he realized with a strange jolt, watched them pass with poorly disguised curiosity. His phone buzzed incessantly, messages from board members and his closest friend and COO, Warren Phillips, demanding immediate contact. Alexander instructed his smart home system to prepare a child-appropriate dinner, then returned the most urgent call. "Alex, what the hell is going on?" Warren's voice carried decades of friendship and shared secrets. "I've got board members calling me about some child you brought into headquarters. Please tell me this isn't what I think it is." Alexander glanced toward the hallway where Jasmine had disappeared. "We need to talk, but not now. Tomorrow morning." Warren's deep sigh carried through the connection. "Emergency board meeting, 8 sharp. Damage control, Alex. That's what we do." The implied solidarity made Alexander uneasy in a way it never had before. After ensuring Jasmine was settled with dinner, Alexander retreated to his home office, reviewing the documents Vanessa had provided. Each page revealed systematic discrimination he had allowed to flourish within his company. His own email, authorizing HR to handle the situation, was included, its callous dismissal of a human being of Vanessa now undeniable. The following morning, Alexander arranged for a trusted household manager to stay with Jasmine, promising to return soon. The boardroom felt different as he entered 14 white faces, regarded him with expressions ranging from concern to thinly veiled contempt. Warren stood at the head of the table, already controlling the narrative. "Alex, good of you to join us. We were just discussing the potential implications for the Southworth merger." Alexander took his seat, noting the portfolio prepared for each member. Warren continued without missing a beat. "We've drafted a comprehensive settlement agreement for Miss Williams. Very generous terms, $5 million, full medical coverage for her condition, education fund for the child. In exchange, complete confidentiality and relinquishment of any paternity claims." Alexander opened the folder before him, scanning the document that had already been prepared without his knowledge or input. "When did you put this together, Warren?" His friend smiled confidently. "As soon as I heard, that's my job, Alex, protecting your interests, protecting this company." Something in his tone made Alexander look up sharply. Warren met his gaze directly. "This isn't our first rodeo, Alex. Remember Jacksonville 25 years ago? That situation with the receptionist? We handled it then, we'll handle it now." The boardroom remained silent, but Alexander saw knowing glances exchanged. The implication was clear. This was simply another situation involving another black woman, another inconvenient consequence to be managed with money and legal documents. Alexander was about to respond when movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. Through the glass wall of the boardroom, he spotted Jasmine standing in the hallway. His household manager appeared immediately behind her, mouthing apologies. The child's expression made it clear she had heard at least some of the conversation. Warren followed his gaze and muttered, "Jesus, Alex, control your situation." Alexander rose abruptly, exiting to the hallway where Jasmine stood completely still, her small face a study in hurt confusion. He knelt before her, suddenly aware of the boardroom's eyes on his back. "I wanted to see where you work," she said quietly. "Your friend said I'm a situation." Alexander felt a surge of protective anger, surprising in its intensity. "You're not a situation, Jasmine. You're a person." The simplicity of this truth struck him profoundly. He led her to his private office, away from prying eyes, explaining that his household manager had brought her after she'd insisted on seeing where her father worked. The word father hung between them, neither confirmed nor denied. Jasmine wandered his office, studying the awards and photographs, documenting his rise to power. "There are no people who look like me or Mom," she observed, gesturing to the wall of images featuring Alexander with politicians, celebrities, and business leaders, all white. When she turned back to him, her question cut through his defenses with the precision only a child's innocence could achieve. "Do they hate me because I'm black like Mommy?" The question left Alexander speechless, confronting him with the reality that his silence on matters of race throughout his career had been its own form of complicity. In that moment, he made a decision that would alter the trajectory of his carefully constructed life. He called Caroline, instructing her to cancel his meetings for the remainder of the day. Warren appeared at his office door, face tight with controlled fury. "What are you doing, Alex?" "The board is waiting." Alexander met his oldest friend's gaze, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time the ugliness that had always hidden beneath their shared success. "Tell them I'll address their concerns tomorrow. Today, I'm taking my daughter to the hospital to visit her mother." Warren's expression hardened. "Don't use that word until the DNA tests are back. Think strategically for once in your life." Alexander ushered Jasmine past his friend, feeling a strange liberation in choosing a different path than the one that had been laid before him for decades. As they left the building, Jasmine slipped her small hand into his, a tentative gesture of trust that felt heavier with responsibility than any business contract he had ever signed. The hospital corridor smelled of industrial disinfectant and lingering illness. Alexander noticed how differently the staff treated him now that they associated him with Vanessa's care. The same doctors who had been dismissive now approached with deferential smiles. This transformation, based solely on his perceived financial involvement rather than Vanessa's humanity, troubled him deeply. Vanessa was awake. Her condition marginally improved since his intervention the previous day. While Jasmine busied herself with a tablet in the corner, Alexander pulled a chair close to the bed. "I've been reviewing your documents," he said quietly. Vanessa studied his face, searching for the dismissive denial she clearly expected. Instead, Alexander continued, "I'd like to hear your story. Not what's in the papers, what actually happened to you after you left the company." Something like surprise flickered across her features before she reached for a leather-bound journal on her bedside table. "I've documented everything since the day HR called me in. It became a habit, then a necessity." Alexander listened as Vanessa detailed a systematic dismantling of her life after her termination. Despite her impressive credentials, interviews mysteriously fell through after initial enthusiasm. She was denied housing in safer neighborhoods, despite meeting all financial requirements. When complications arose during her pregnancy, several doctors minimized her concerns until a critical emergency revealed the heart condition that would affect Jasmine throughout her childhood. Each time I faced these barriers, I researched others in similar situations, Vanessa explained. The pattern became undeniable. She had compiled statistical evidence of discrimination that would be admissible in court had she possessed the resources to pursue legal action. Alexander realized she hadn't shown him these documents as a threat, but as validation of her lived reality. Jasmine approached the bed, showing Alexander her tablet with evident pride. On the screen was a coding project, a simple algorithm she had created that organized her mother's medical information. "Mom taught me to code when I was 4, she explained. Alexander recognized elements of neural network design that mirrored his company's early work Vanessa had contributed to significantly. "She's extraordinarily gifted," Vanessa said softly, "just like her father." The simple acknowledgement of his paternity, offered without bitterness, left Alexander momentarily speechless. That evening, Alexander suggested taking Jasmine to dinner, allowing Vanessa time to rest. He chose an upscale restaurant where he was known and respected, confident they would receive excellent service. The maitre d's smile faltered slightly upon seeing Jasmine, but recovered quickly as he recognized Alexander. Despite numerous empty tables near the windows, they were led to a section near the kitchen where the only other diners were a family of color. Alexander, about to object, caught himself. This was the treatment Vanessa had documented, the invisible barriers he had never needed to see. Throughout the meal, Alexander noticed subtle differences in service. Questions were directed exclusively to him. Jasmine's attempts at conversation with the waiter were politely ignored, and nearby patrons occasionally glanced their way with poorly disguised curiosity. When Jasmine spilled her water, a server responded with disproportionate concern about potential damage to the furnishings. "It's okay," Jasmine whispered, her small shoulders hunching slightly. "This happens a lot when Mom and I go places." The practiced resignation in her voice crystallized something in Alexander's understanding. This child had already learned to navigate a world that viewed her with suspicion and diminished expectations. As they were finishing dessert, Alexander's phone chimed with an urgent notification. The board had called an emergency session in his absence and voted to place him on temporary leave, pending resolution of personal matters that may impact company interests. The message from Warren was brief. "This is for your own protection. Don't make it messier than it already is." Alexander felt a familiar flush of anger, but was distracted by Jasmine tugging his sleeve. "Can we go back to the hospital? I want to show Mom something I made today." Her innocence amid the corporate machinations provided stark perspective. In the hospital parking lot, Alexander discovered someone had keyed his car with a racial slur. He positioned himself to block Jasmine's view, quickly arranging for a rideshare service instead. At the hospital, Jasmine proudly showed them both her latest coding project, an algorithm that analyzed patterns in her mother's medical records. "See these numbers? They changed right before Mom got worse last time. And the doctors didn't notice, but I did." Alexander examined her work with growing astonishment. The child had identified medication interaction patterns that professional healthcare providers had missed. Vanessa watched them with a complex expression, pride in her daughter's brilliance, mingled with the pain of what might have been had circumstances been different. When a nurse entered to check Vanessa's vitals, Alexander noticed Jasmine stiffening slightly. "That's not our regular nurse," she whispered. The new nurse, a white man with an aggressively efficient manner, barely acknowledged Vanessa as he adjusted her medication. After he left, Jasmine showed Alexander her tablet again. "Look, they changed Mom's medicine. See? This number shouldn't go with this one." Alexander verified her observation against Vanessa's chart, a chill running through him as he realized the medication combination could potentially worsen her condition. He immediately requested the attending physician, who confirmed the error and expressed confused concern about the unauthorized medication change. That night, as Jasmine finally succumbed to sleep in a chair beside her mother's bed, Alexander began making calls. Something beyond corporate politics was happening, and for the first time in his carefully controlled existence, Alexander felt the disorienting vulnerability that came with fighting an invisible system designed to protect people exactly like himself at the expense of people exactly like his daughter. Sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, casting striped shadows across Vanessa's sleeping form. Alexander had spent the night in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, unwilling to leave after the medication incident. His phone vibrated constantly with messages he had stopped answering. During a brief moment when both Vanessa and Jasmine were asleep, he checked the news and felt his stomach drop. Splashed across financial websites and gossip platforms alike was the headline, "Tech Billionaire's Secret Child." Sources questioned motives behind sudden claim. The article featured a photograph of Jasmine entering his building, her face blurred but recognizable, alongside insinuations about Vanessa's credibility and character. The racial undertones were barely disguised, referring to patterns of behavior among certain individuals seeking financial gain. Alexander recognized Warren's influence in the carefully worded character assassination. Before he could process this fully, alarms began sounding from Vanessa's monitors. Medical staff rushed in as she experienced seizure-like symptoms, her condition deteriorating rapidly. Jasmine woke terrified, and Alexander pulled her from the room, trying to shield her from the chaos while his own heart hammered painfully. A young black nurse named Dr. Layla Washington approached them in the hallway, her expression grave but determined. "Mr. Reed, I need to speak with you privately." In a quiet consultation room, she revealed that the new doctor assigned to Vanessa's case had administered a medication contraindicated for patients with her specific lupus complication. "I flagged it immediately, but was overruled. This isn't standard procedure. Someone made this decision deliberately." Alexander stared at her, processing the implications. "Why are you telling me this?" Dr. Washington's eyes flicked to the doorway where Jasmine waited. "Because that little girl came to the nurse's station last night with data showing exactly what would happen if that medication was continued. None of the doctors would listen to a 6-year-old, but she was right." She hesitated before adding, "And because I've seen too many black women's symptoms dismissed until it's too late." Alexander asked about the doctor who had made the medication decision. Dr. Washington revealed he had transferred from a private practice with connections to Southworth Medical Systems, the healthcare conglomerate owned by the same conservative Southern family whose company was pursuing a merger with Alexander's firm. The connection was too specific to be coincidental. While Vanessa was stabilized, Alexander enrolled Jasmine in an exclusive private school near his penthouse, hoping to provide normalcy amid the chaos. 3 days later, he received a distressed call from her during lunch period. Anonymous notes had appeared in her desk and locker, containing racial slurs and warnings to go back where you belong. The administration seemed more concerned about the school's reputation than Jasmine's safety, suggesting that perhaps she would be more comfortable in an environment better suited to her background. The thinly veiled racism ignited something primal in Alexander. He removed Jasmine immediately, bringing her back to the penthouse where he discovered another shock. His executive access to company systems had been revoked. Warren had arranged an administrative leave that effectively cut Alexander off from the empire he had built over 3 decades. When he attempted to transfer personal funds to cover Vanessa's ongoing treatment, he discovered his primary accounts had been frozen, pending investigation of potential financial impropriety. The message was clear: acquiesce to Warren's demands or face systematic destruction. Alexander's private security team alerted him to another disturbing development. Someone had accessed his penthouse during their hospital visit. The intruders had been professional, leaving minimal evidence, but Jasmine immediately noticed her backpack had been searched. Vanessa's documentation of discrimination was missing, as were Jasmine's medical records and the tablet containing her analysis program. Stripped of his usual resources and facing enemies wielding his own company's power against him, Alexander faced a stark reality. The system he had helped build, which had always protected and enriched him, was now being deployed as a weapon against his child and her mother. His wealth and influence, previously shields against life's difficulties, were being systematically dismantled. For the first time, Alexander experienced a fraction of the vulnerability that had characterized Vanessa's existence since her termination. Looking at Jasmine's frightened but determined face, Alexander made a decision. If he couldn't fight using traditional power, he would need to find different allies, people who understood this battlefield far better than he ever had. As they prepared to leave the penthouse, Jasmine tugged his sleeve. "Dad," she said, testing the word carefully, "Mom always says when the usual path is blocked, you need to find people who know the hidden ones." The simple wisdom in her statement sparked an idea. Alexander had spent decades ignoring activists who had criticized his company's practices. Perhaps it was time to seek their expertise instead. The law offices of Henderson and Associates occupied a modest building in a predominantly black neighborhood miles from Alexander's usual haunts. The waiting room featured portraits of civil rights leaders alongside news clippings documenting legal victories against corporate discrimination. Jasmine studied these with interest while Alexander shifted uncomfortably under the receptionist's skeptical gaze. Imani Henderson kept them waiting 45 minutes, a power move Alexander recognized but couldn't fault her for. When finally ushered into her office, he faced a formidable woman whose penetrating stare had unnerved corporate attorneys across multiple courtrooms. "I remember you," she said without preamble. 5 years ago, my firm represented 12 black employees in a class action against your company. You never appeared in person, sent your legal team instead. Case dismissed on technical grounds after your people buried us in paperwork." Alexander nodded, acknowledging the history. "That's why I'm here. I need someone who understands what we're up against." Imani's laugh held no humor. "We? Suddenly there's a we?" She turned her attention to Jasmine, her expression softening slightly. "Hello, young lady. I'm Miss Henderson." Jasmine stepped forward with surprising confidence. "I'm Jasmine Williams-Reed. Someone hurt my mom at the hospital, and now they're trying to hurt my dad, too. I think it's because of me." The simple directness of her statement accomplished what Alexander's wealth could not. Imani gestured for them to sit, her professional demeanor intact but with newfound attentiveness. Alexander explained their situation, from Vanessa's termination to the recent hospital incident and his frozen assets. Imani listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Let me be clear, Mr. Reed. For decades, your company has systematically discriminated against black employees, buried evidence, and used legal maneuvers to avoid consequences. Now that it affects you personally, you want my help?" The harsh assessment hung between them. Before Alexander could respond, Jasmine spoke up. "My mom says people can learn and change if you give them a chance." She still kept all the evidence, even though she thought nobody would ever believe her. Imani studied the child thoughtfully before returning her gaze to Alexander. "Convenient timing for your awakening, Mr. Reed." Alexander met her eyes directly. "You're right. I ignored these issues until they affected me personally. I have no defense for that. But right now, Vanessa's life is in danger. My daughter is being targeted, and the people responsible control billions in resources. You don't have to believe I've changed, just that I'm motivated to fight the same system you've been fighting all along." Something in his candor seemed to reach her. After a long moment, Imani nodded once. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for them." She outlined her conditions, complete transparency, following her lead without question, and using whatever resources Alexander still controlled to support a broader anti-discrimination initiative beyond their immediate case. Most significantly, she demanded public acknowledgement of his company's discriminatory practices once the immediate danger had passed. Alexander agreed without hesitation. Through Imani's connections, Alexander was introduced to a network he had never known existed: professionals, activists, and community leaders who had been combating systemic racism through strategic, coordinated efforts. Marshall Jackson, a veteran journalist who had covered corporate discrimination for 20 years, revealed he had been tracking Alexander's company since its inception. "Your firm has settled 37 discrimination cases with non-disclosure agreements in the past decade alone," Marshall explained, spreading documentation across Imani's conference table. "I've interviewed 23 former employees, all with similar experiences to Miss Williams. Among the patterns Marshall had identified was a troubling correlation. Employees who filed complaints often faced subsequent challenges securing housing, healthcare, and employment, suggesting coordination beyond Alexander's company alone. These systems are interconnected, Imani explained. Banking practices that appear neutral actually perpetuate housing discrimination. Healthcare algorithms contain hidden biases. Educational tracking programs disproportionately limit Black children's advancement. Once you start looking, the patterns are undeniable. Alexander thought of Jasmine's algorithm, identifying patterns in her mother's medical data, how a 6-year-old had seen connections that specialists missed, whether through incompetence or deliberate negligence. While the adults strategized, Jasmine worked quietly in the corner of Imani's office, using a borrowed laptop to recreate her analysis program. Occasionally, she asked technical questions that demonstrated her extraordinary intellect. Marshall watched her with growing admiration. "She's remarkable," he commented to Alexander. Like her mother, Alexander replied automatically, then added more thoughtfully, "And she deserves a world that sees that brilliance instead of just her skin color." The comment earned him a measuring look from Imani, who later that evening shared a devastating revelation. "One of my contacts at the hospital obtained Vanessa's full medical records. The medication error was deliberate, specifically designed to create complications that would appear natural for someone with her condition." The implication was clear: someone wanted Vanessa silenced permanently. Marshall had been investigating Warren's activities and discovered a pattern of aggressive suppression targeting anyone who threatened the company's reputation. "He's been doing this for years," Marshall explained, "building dossiers on employees who file complaints, using private investigators to find vulnerabilities, coordinating with other businesses to blacklist whistleblowers." When Alexander expressed horror at these revelations, Imani fixed him with a level gaze. "Where did you think these people disappeared to, Mr. Reed? Did you imagine they all simply found wonderful new opportunities elsewhere?" The question exposed his willful ignorance over decades. As their meeting concluded, Jasmine approached with the laptop, showing them her progress. She had created a simple but effective program that identified patterns across various datasets, medical records, employment documents, and financial transactions. "Mom taught me that patterns tell stories people try to hide," she explained. The adults exchanged glances, recognizing that this child's perspective might offer insights they had missed. That night, in a safe house arranged by Imani, Alexander lay awake, contemplating how thoroughly his worldview had been upended in less than a week. Beside him, Jasmine slept fitfully, occasionally murmuring her mother's name. Alexander realized that whatever redemption might be possible for him began with ensuring this child's safety and reuniting her with the mother who had protected her despite overwhelming odds. His company, his wealth, his reputation, all seemed suddenly insignificant compared to that fundamental responsibility. Morning sunlight streamed through the country club's expansive windows, illuminating immaculate grounds where wealthy members enjoyed privileged isolation. Alexander had chosen this location for his confrontation with Warren. Deliberately surrounded by the trappings of privilege they had both pursued relentlessly, the truth might finally emerge unvarnished. Warren appeared surprised, but pleased by the invitation, clearly assuming Alexander had come to his senses. They were seated in a private dining alcove, crystal and silver gleaming between them as Warren ordered expansively, without consulting the menu, a small demonstration of his belonging in this exclusive space. "I've been worried about you, Alex," Warren began, his concern appearing genuine. "Sleeping in hospitals, missing board meetings, neglecting the Southworth negotiations. This isn't like you." Alexander studied his oldest friend, searching for the moment their paths had diverged so dramatically. "How long have you been targeting employees who file discrimination complaints, Warren?" The direct question shattered the civilized veneer. Warren's expression hardened momentarily before settling into practiced neutrality. "I've always protected our company's interests. That's what you hired me to do 25 years ago." Alexander leaned forward. "I've seen the documentation. Systematic harassment, coordinated blacklisting, interference with medical care. When did we become this?" Warren sighed with what appeared to be genuine regret. "We've always been this, Alex. You just preferred not to know the details." The simple truth landed like a physical blow. Warren continued, warming to his subject. "Our company wasn't built for diversity and inclusion. It was built to win, to dominate markets, to create wealth for shareholders. Everything else is window dressing." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Look, I understand the child got to you. That's natural. But recognizing her publicly, bringing her into headquarters, you've worked too hard to throw everything away over sentimentality and guilt." Alexander felt cold clarity settling over him. "You arranged for Vanessa's medication to be changed. You were willing to let her die." Warren didn't deny it. Complicated medical conditions have natural setbacks. No one would have questioned it. The casual dismissal of Vanessa's life crystallized everything. Alexander stood abruptly. "We're done, Warren. Not just this conversation, everything." Warren's composure slipped, his voice rising. "You self-righteous hypocrite. Who do you think signed off on those terminations all these years? Who built this company on the backs of employees we discarded whenever convenient? Your hands aren't clean, Alex." Their escalating argument drew attention from nearby diners. A club manager approached, his concerned gaze directed at Alexander despite Warren's increasingly aggressive posture. "Is everything all right, Mr. Phillips? Is this gentleman bothering you?" The automatic assumption that Alexander was the aggressor, despite his calm demeanor compared to Warren's visible anger, provided its own perfect illustration of the biases embedded in their world. As security personnel appeared to escort Alexander out despite his lifetime membership, Warren delivered a final warning. "If you pursue this, I'll release everything. Every discrimination case, every covered-up complaint. You'll be finished." Alexander paused before responding. Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. At the hospital, Vanessa had improved enough for extended conversation. With Jasmine occupied by a child life specialist, Vanessa revealed information she had withheld until now. "I knew something like this might happen eventually," she explained, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "After I was terminated, I recorded every interaction with HR and executives. I have conversations explicitly discussing discriminatory practices, including some with Warren directing specific actions against employees who filed complaints." Alexander stared at her in astonishment. "Why didn't you use these recordings?" Vanessa's laugh held no humor. A single black mother against a multi-billion-dollar corporation? With what resources? What lawyer would take that case on contingency? What judge would remain impartial? The recordings were secured in a safety deposit box, accessible only with a code known to Vanessa's sister Layla. Alexander arranged for immediate transport to Layla's apartment in West Point Heights, the neighborhood where Vanessa had been forced to relocate after her termination. The contrast between the country club's manicured perfection and this neglected community with crumbling infrastructure was stark. Buildings in disrepair lined streets where public services clearly operated at minimum capacity. Alexander noticed Jasmine becoming increasingly quiet as they approached, her expression a mixture of familiarity and resignation that no 6-year-old should possess. Layla's apartment building had functioning security cameras but broken entry locks. As they approached her unit, Alexander noted the door was slightly ajar. Inside, they found the apartment ransacked and Layla nursing a bleeding forehead wound. "They came about 2 hours ago," she explained as Alexander helped her to the sofa. "2 men in suits asking about Vanessa's records. When I denied knowing anything, they tore the place apart." Jasmine ran to her aunt, small hands checking her injury with worried expertise. "You need stitches, Auntie Layla," she declared with authority that made both adults pause. Despite the chaos, Layla managed to smile. They were too late. "I moved the real recordings weeks ago when Vanessa told me she was planning to contact you. There's a flash drive in a teddy bear Jasmine left here last visit." The child retrieved a worn stuffed animal from a shelf the intruders had overlooked, expertly opening a hidden compartment in its back to reveal a small metal drive. As they hurried to leave with this critical evidence, shots were fired at their vehicle, shattering the rear window. Alexander instinctively covered Jasmine with his body as their driver executed a practiced evasive maneuver. They sought temporary sanctuary in an unfamiliar neighborhood where Alexander experienced a revelation about justice in America. When police responded to reports of gunfire, their approach to Layla, a frantic black woman with a bleeding head wound, was drastically different from their treatment of Alexander. Officers who had initially drawn weapons holstered them immediately upon recognizing him, their demeanor transforming from suspicious aggression to deferential concern. The contrast was educational in ways no diversity training could ever achieve. As one officer assured Alexander they would handle this situation with discretion, he caught Jasmine watching the interaction with knowing eyes far too old for her years. She had witnessed this disparity her entire young life, while Alexander was only now beginning to truly see it. The recordings they had risked so much to obtain revealed Warren's discrimination strategy in damning detail, explicit discussions of targeting employees based on race, coordinating with other companies to maintain informal blacklists, and manipulating systems to create barriers for anyone who challenged the status quo. Most disturbing were conversations about Vanessa specifically, planning her termination immediately after Warren learned of her pregnancy. Alexander's own voice appeared in several recordings, not explicitly directing discriminatory actions, but clearly delegating problems to Warren with willful blindness about the methods used to resolve them. The evidence was irrefutable, but utilizing it would expose Alexander's own complicity in the system he now fought. This moral reckoning arrived as they received word that Vanessa had suffered another setback at the hospital, this time from natural complications of her condition rather than external interference. As they rushed back to her side, Alexander realized the luxury of his awakening came too late for the damage already inflicted on lives like Vanessa's and Jasmine's. Accountability would need to extend beyond Warren alone. Rain lashed against the windows of the small apartment Imani had arranged as their temporary safe house. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at the country club, and Warren had escalated his campaign against them. Vanessa remained hospitalized but stable, protected by security personnel from Imani's network. Alexander paced the modest living room, a man accustomed to penthouse views and executive suites now confined to a 2-bedroom unit in a nondescript building. Jasmine sat cross-legged on the sofa, her borrowed laptop balanced on her knees as she continued developing her pattern recognition algorithm. The past 72 hours had been a crash course in living without the shields of wealth and privilege. Alexander had experienced subtle indignities he had previously been insulated from the suspicious glances from store clerks when he entered with Jasmine, the assumptions about his character from neighbors, who saw a middle-aged white man with a young black child. These small moments accumulated into a more profound understanding of the daily reality Vanessa had documented so meticulously. Through Imani's connections, Alexander met other families who had experienced similar discrimination from major corporations. Former employees whose careers and lives had been systematically dismantled after raising concerns about workplace treatment. Each story contained familiar elements: suddenly negative performance reviews, mysterious withdrawal of job offers, housing applications denied despite excellent credit, medical concerns dismissed until reaching crisis points. Among these families were 3 former employees of Alexander's own company, each terminated during his tenure as CEO. Facing them required a humility previously foreign to him. "I should have known," he acknowledged during a community meeting Imani had arranged. "I chose not to know." Their forgiveness was not immediately forthcoming, nor did Alexander expect it should be. Meanwhile, he leveraged his remaining connections to investigate Warren's activities more thoroughly. A sympathetic executive provided access to internal communications revealing Warren had been systematically suppressing discrimination claims across multiple businesses while simultaneously managing the company's highly publicized diversity initiatives. "He's been running a sophisticated operation," Marshall explained as they reviewed the documents. "Public statements about inclusion while privately maintaining what amounts to a corporate apartheid system." The evidence was damning, but using it effectively required careful strategy. Warren controlled most traditional channels of power: media contacts, political connections, and financial resources that could bury their claims in protracted legal battles. Jasmine continued refining her algorithm, now identifying patterns in the corporate data that revealed intentional discrimination in hiring, promotion, and termination decisions. Her program highlighted statistical anomalies that, taken individually, might be dismissed as coincidence, but collectively formed an undeniable pattern of systemic bias. "Mom taught me about statistical significance," she explained when Alexander expressed amazement at her work. "She said numbers don't lie, even when people do." Imani prepared legal action while Marshall developed an exposé, but both warned that traditional systems might fail them given Warren's influence and Alexander's own complicated history with the issues. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly, an anonymous digital message containing video footage of Warren meeting with the doctor who had tampered with Vanessa's medication. The exchange was brief but unambiguous, including discussion of ensuring a natural-appearing setback in her condition. The source identified themselves only as someone else who kept receipts. The footage provided leverage, but using it required consideration of potential consequences. Publicly exposing Warren would implicate others within the corporate structure, potentially including executives who might become valuable allies in reforming the company's practices. Alexander recognized the ethical complexity of selectively targeting Warren while protecting others who had been complicit, including, to some degree, himself. During these strategic discussions, Alexander noticed Jasmine becoming increasingly withdrawn. Her normally vibrant curiosity dimmed, replaced by fatigue and occasional complaints of joint pain and headaches. Initially attributing these symptoms to stress, Alexander became concerned when her discomfort intensified. When she developed a low fever, he insisted on medical attention despite her protests that she was fine, just tired. At the hospital, a different facility from Vanessa's, chosen for security reasons, the examining physician asked routine questions about family medical history. Alexander hesitated, realizing how little he knew about Jasmine's health background. The doctor noted his uncertainty. "Autoimmune conditions often have genetic components," she explained gently. "Has Jasmine ever been tested for markers related to her mother's lupus?" Alexander admitted she hadn't, at least not to his knowledge. The subsequent examination and blood tests confirmed their fears. Jasmine showed early indicators of the same autoimmune condition that had nearly claimed Vanessa's life. The doctor explained that symptoms in children were often dismissed as growing pains or anxiety, particularly in Black children whose pain was frequently underestimated by medical professionals. "Early intervention is critical," she emphasized. "With proper monitoring and treatment, many children with these markers never develop full-blown disease." Alexander felt a cold wave of realization. His own unexamined prejudices had led him to ignore signs of Jasmine's illness that Vanessa would have immediately recognized and advocated for. His failure to question, to look deeper, to consider possibilities beyond his limited perspective had placed his daughter at risk in ways he was only beginning to understand. As he held Jasmine's hand during the blood draw, her small fingers gripping his with surprising strength, Alexander confronted the ultimate consequence of systemic discrimination. It endangered not just opportunities or dignity, but lives themselves. The night before they planned to go public with their evidence, Alexander received a final message from Warren. "Tomorrow won't go as you expect. Last chance to protect what matters." The implied threat accelerated their timeline. Marshall prepared to publish his exposé at midnight, while Imani finalized emergency court filings to prevent retaliatory legal action. In the quiet of the safe house, with Jasmine finally sleeping after her medical ordeal, Alexander confronted the reality that their victory, if achieved, would forever alter the world he had built. The company bearing his name would be exposed as fundamentally corrupt, his own legacy permanently tarnished. Surprisingly, these concerns felt increasingly insignificant compared to the responsibility of ensuring Jasmine received the medical care she needed and that Vanessa could recover without fear of retribution. Transformation, Alexander was learning, required sacrifice. The question remained whether he possessed sufficient courage to surrender the power and privilege that had defined his existence for more than 5 decades. Fluorescent hospital lights cast a harsh glow over Vanessa's sleeping form. In the adjacent bed, Jasmine had finally succumbed to exhausted slumber after hours of fever and discomfort. Alexander maintained his vigil between them, a physical embodiment of his commitment to protect them both. The past 24 hours had unfolded with dizzying intensity. Jasmine's condition had deteriorated rapidly, requiring emergency admission to the same facility where Vanessa was being treated. Initial tests confirmed juvenile-onset lupus, requiring immediate intervention to prevent organ damage. As Alexander authorized treatment protocols, his phone had buzzed with an incoming call from Warren. Against Imani's advice, he had answered. "Final offer, Alex." Warren's voice carried the confidence of a man accustomed to winning. "I've blocked Marshall's exposé from publication." 3 major outlets received cease and desist letters, threatening litigation that would bankrupt them. Imani's legal filings have been delayed through judicial connections. The casual mention of such far-reaching influence should have shocked Alexander, but after recent revelations, it merely confirmed the depth of corruption he had benefited from for decades. Warren continued, outlining his terms with businesslike precision. "Your entire fortune and permanent exile from the technology industry in exchange for guaranteed top-tier medical care for Vanessa and Jasmine. My personal guarantee their treatment will be world-class and their futures secure." The offer contained no explicit threats, yet the implications were clear in what remained unspoken refusal would mean continued attacks on their health, safety, and access to necessary care. "I need time to consider," Alexander had replied, mind racing with possibilities. Warren's laugh held no humor. "You have until morning. Don't make me demonstrate how much worse things can get for them." Now, watching over the 2 sleeping patients who had irrevocably altered his life's trajectory, Alexander prepared for the most consequential negotiation of his career. At precisely 9 the following morning, Warren arrived at the hospital with his legal team and 2 board members. They commandeered a conference room, the power dynamics immediately established by their positioning around the table. Alexander entered alone, deliberately projecting defeat in his posture and expression. Warren began without preamble, sliding documents across the polished surface. "Everything's prepared. Full transfer of your holdings to the designated trusts. Resignation from all boards and industry positions. Non-compete clause preventing technology involvement for 20 years. The terms were punitive. Beyond financial considerations, they sought to erase Alexander's professional identity entirely. "And in return?" Alexander asked, voice carefully modulated to convey reluctant acceptance. Warren's smile didn't reach his eyes. Comprehensive healthcare coverage for Miss Williams and the child. Generous living stipends. Educational trust for the girl. Most importantly, this ends today. No exposé, no legal proceedings, no public embarrassment for anyone. The implied threat lingered beneath his words. Alexander nodded slowly, reaching for the fountain pen Warren extended. "One condition," he said quietly. "I want to see the additional documents." Warren's expression flickered briefly with annoyance before he nodded to an attorney who produced a second portfolio. These papers revealed the true extent of the exchange: comprehensive non-disclosure agreements, statements retracting any claims of discrimination, and legal releases, absolving the company and its executives from all liability. Most disturbingly, they included provisions granting Warren's designated physicians oversight of all medical decisions for both Vanessa and Jasmine. Alexander studied the documents carefully, asking occasional clarifying questions that suggested he was simply ensuring the protection of his daughter and her mother. In reality, each question was calculated to extend the meeting, allowing crucial time for the strategy he had developed with Imani to unfold. Warren grew increasingly impatient as Alexander methodically reviewed each page. "This isn't a negotiation, Alex. Sign the papers or face the consequences." With deliberate slowness, Alexander lifted the pen and signed the first document, the transfer of his primary holdings to Warren's controlled trust. The act appeared to satisfy Warren, whose triumphant expression revealed the personal nature of his victory. As Alexander continued signing documents, occasionally pausing to ask strategic questions, Warren elaborated on his vision for the company's future. "The tech industry isn't built for social experimentation," he explained, with the confidence of someone who believed his worldview was simply objective reality. Merit means excellence, not meeting arbitrary diversity quotas. Alexander maintained his facade of defeated acceptance while monitoring the time on his watch. At precisely 10:30, he signed the final document and slid the portfolio back across the table. "It's done," he said simply. Warren's smile broadened. "You made the right choice, Alex. For everyone involved." The words had barely left his mouth when alarms began sounding throughout the building. Not medical alerts, but the distinctive tone of information security breaches. Warren's phone buzzed simultaneously with multiple notifications, his expression transforming from satisfaction to confusion and then to dawning horror. "What have you done?" he demanded, already accessing his device with frantic energy. Alexander straightened in his chair, shedding the posture of defeat he had carefully maintained. "While we've been meeting, Jasmine's algorithm has been running on your company servers. You were so focused on suppressing external threats that you never considered the enemy was already inside your system. The strategy had been elegant in its simplicity. During his last days of access, before being locked out of company systems, Alexander had uploaded Jasmine's pattern recognition algorithm to a secluded corner of the corporate cloud. The program had been steadily analyzing internal data, identifying and compiling evidence of discrimination across every department. Most critically, it had been programmed to activate at this precise time, automatically transmitting its findings to every employee email address, key journalists, regulatory agencies, and industry watchdogs simultaneously. "You can't shut it down," Alexander explained as Warren frantically called his technical team. "The algorithm is designed to spread faster than you can contain it. Every attempt to block transmission simply triggers alternative distribution channels." Through a secure digital pathway established by Jasmine herself, a child whose brilliance had been consistently underestimated by everyone except her mother, the evidence was reaching thousands of recipients simultaneously. Warren's facade of civilized professionalism crumbled entirely. In a moment of blind rage, he pulled a small handgun from his jacket, pointing it directly at Alexander. "I can still end this, and you." Hospital security personnel, already alerted to potential threats, burst into the room at the sight of the weapon on surveillance cameras. For perhaps the first time in his privileged existence, Warren's status and wealth failed to shield him from consequences. As he was restrained and the weapon secured, his final words to Alexander carried the bitter recognition of defeat. "You've destroyed everything we built." Alexander watched his oldest friend being escorted away by security, feeling neither satisfaction nor vindication, only the sobering weight of complicity in a system he had helped create and maintain. The signed documents on the table were now irrelevant. His testimony about Warren's coercion would invalidate them legally. More importantly, the evidence flooding from company servers would make such private settlements impossible. Returning to the hospital room where Vanessa and Jasmine were now both awake and receiving treatment, Alexander shared news of what had transpired. Vanessa's expression remained guarded, years of disappointment and betrayal not easily overcome by a single act of belated justice. Jasmine, however, smiled with the simple clarity of a child whose understanding of right and wrong remained uncomplicated by adult compromise. "Does this mean we're safe now?" she asked, the question containing layers of meaning beyond physical security. Alexander considered his response carefully, aware that dishonesty would damage the fragile trust they were building. "Warren can't hurt you anymore," he answered truthfully. "But changing the bigger systems will take more time and work from many people." Jasmine nodded with surprising maturity, then asked the question that would shape the months to come. "Will you help change them, even when it's hard?" The simplicity of her challenge cut through Alexander's remaining defenses. His answer would determine not just his relationship with this extraordinary child, but his place in the transformation his awakening had set in motion. "Yes," he promised, "even when it's hard." The commitment felt more binding than any contract he had signed throughout his business career. 6 months passed with the swift intensity of profound transformation. Spring sunshine bathed the courtyard where a diverse group gathered for the official launch of the Reed Williams Foundation for Equity in Technology and Healthcare. Reporters clustered near the podium, their presence evidence of the story's continued resonance months after Warren's dramatic arrest and the company's public reckoning. Vanessa stood at the microphone. Her health improved, though still requiring careful management. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had finally received external validation of truths she had always known. Our foundation begins with a simple premise that systems designed to exclude certain voices inevitably produce harmful outcomes for everyone. Our mission is transformation, not merely representation. Alexander watched from the side of the stage, his position deliberately secondary to Vanessa's leadership. The months following Warren's removal had brought seismic changes to the corporate landscape. The class action lawsuit filed on behalf of former employees had resulted in the largest discrimination settlement in corporate history, $4 billion in damages and structural reforms affecting hiring, promotion, and workplace culture throughout the technology sector. Alexander's personal fortune had diminished considerably, though he remained comfortably wealthy. The difference was purpose, his resources now directed toward dismantling systems he had previously benefited from without question. Vanessa had assumed leadership of the foundation, implementing programs she had envisioned for years, but lacked resources to create. Her expertise in neural networks had found new application in developing algorithms that identified and corrected for bias in artificial intelligence systems. Most major technology companies now used her protocols as industry standards, her name finally receiving the recognition her innovations had always deserved. The formerly hostile board members had faced varying consequences. Some had resigned immediately when the evidence emerged, others fought removal through legal channels, and a few had undergone genuine reckonings with their own complicity. Warren awaited trial on multiple charges, including attempted murder, corporate fraud, and criminal conspiracy. His fall had prompted soul-searching throughout the technology industry about cultures that rewarded results while ignoring methods. For Alexander, the most profound changes had been personal. He had testified publicly about his own role in perpetuating discriminatory systems, neither minimizing his responsibility nor seeking absolution. This accountability had cost him relationships and reputation in some circles, while opening unexpected doors in others. Jasmine's health had stabilized with proper treatment. She attended a new school with diverse students and teachers, thriving in an environment that nurtured rather than constrained her exceptional abilities. Her algorithm had evolved into a sophisticated artificial intelligence tool that could identify discriminatory patterns in institutional systems from healthcare to criminal justice. At just 7 years old, she had become something of a reluctant celebrity in technology circles, though Alexander and Vanessa carefully shielded her from excessive public attention. Their relationship had evolved into a complex family system, not the traditional structure Alexander might once have envisioned, but one built on mutual respect and shared purpose. They maintained separate residences but coordinated parenting responsibilities with increasingly comfortable rhythms. Vanessa's forgiveness had not come easily or completely, nor had Alexander expected it should. Instead, they focused on building something new from the wreckage of past injustice. As Vanessa concluded her remarks, she invited Jasmine to the podium. The audience murmured appreciatively as the small girl approached with characteristic composure. She stood on a prepared platform that brought her to microphone height, her bright yellow dress contrasting with her serious expression. "Hello, everyone. I'm Jasmine Williams-Reed, and I'd like to show you what I've been working on." With remarkable poise, she explained how her pattern recognition tool had evolved. We call it recognition, because that's what it does. It makes visible what privileged systems are designed not to see. The audience watched in fascination as she demonstrated how the program identified subtle patterns of discrimination across seemingly unrelated datasets. More importantly, it suggested structural interventions that could address root causes rather than symptoms. As Jasmine fielded questions with the confidence of someone far beyond her years, Alexander noticed a group of young black programmers watching her with expressions of undisguised hope and recognition. In their faces, he glimpsed the future his daughter was helping to create, one where brilliance like hers would be nurtured rather than suppressed, where systems would be designed for inclusion rather than exclusion. After the presentation concluded, a reporter approached Alexander with the question that had become inevitable at such events. "Do you regret the choices that led to this moment?" Alexander considered his response carefully, aware of Jasmine listening nearby. "I regret the harm caused by my ignorance and inaction," he answered honestly. "But I cannot regret the journey that brought my daughter into my life, nor the awakening she inspired." The question isn't whether we would change our past mistakes, if we could. It's whether we have the courage to create different futures once we recognize them. Later that evening, in a quiet moment before Jasmine returned to Vanessa's home for the week, she asked a question that cut to the heart of their shared journey. "Dad, do you think people really change, or do they just learn to hide their real thoughts better?" The directness of her inquiry reflected Vanessa's influence, the refusal to accept comfortable illusions in place of complicated truths. Alexander considered his response with the seriousness her question deserved. "I believe people can change when they allow themselves to truly see the world through others' eyes," he said finally. "Not just intellectually understanding differences, but emotionally experiencing them. That kind of seeing changes not just what we think, but who we are." Jasmine nodded, processing his words with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Mom says systems change slower than people, but without people changing first, systems never will." The simple wisdom reflected discussions she had clearly absorbed from adults around her. "Your mother is right, as usual," Alexander acknowledged with a smile. "Which is why your algorithm is so important. It helps people see patterns they might otherwise ignore." As they prepared to part for the evening, Jasmine wrapped her arms around him in a spontaneous hug that still felt like a gift he had done nothing to deserve. "See you on Saturday, Dad," she said with the easy confidence of a child who had learned, despite difficult lessons, that she was valued and loved. Watching her walk hand in hand with Vanessa toward their waiting car, Alexander reflected on how close he had come to missing this extraordinary life. The company that once defined his identity now existed as something fundamentally transformed, its former CEO both villain and catalyst, in a story of reckoning and redemption. More importantly, a brilliant child who might have grown up believing her value was diminished by others' perceptions now moved through the world with the confidence of someone who knew her worth was inherent and absolute. If systems change slower than people, as Vanessa wisely observed, the transformation had nonetheless begun. Recognition, seeing clearly what privilege had previously obscured, was indeed the first essential step toward justice. What do you think is the most powerful force for changing deeply entrenched systems of discrimination? Is it personal awakening like Alexander's, legal action like Imani's approach, technological solutions like Jasmine's algorithm, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might benefit from its message. Thank you for joining us on this journey of recognition and transformation. May we all find the courage to see clearly and act justly, especially when it challenges our most comfortable assumptions.